The origins of Halloween stretch back over 2,000 years to the ancient Celtic festival known as Samhain. Samhain was celebrated by the Celts, a group of people who lived in what is now Ireland, the United Kingdom, and northern France. For these early Europeans, Samhain marked the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter, a period associated with darkness, cold, and death. The Celts, whose lives were heavily influenced by the rhythms of nature, viewed this as a time of transition when the boundary between the living and the dead was at its weakest. On the night of October 31st, the Celts believed that the spirits of the dead could return to Earth. They thought that these wandering spirits could cause trouble by damaging crops or spreading illness among the people. To protect themselves from these supernatural entities, the Celts would light massive bonfires to drive the spirits back to the spirit world. These bonfires were also considered a way to honor the gods, as the Celts made offerings of crops and animals, asking for protection during the coming winter. Costumes played an important role during Samhain. People would wear disguises, often made of animal skins, in an attempt to blend in with any roaming spirits. The logic was simple. If the spirits could not distinguish the living from the dead, they would be less likely to harm or harass them. In addition to wearing costumes, the Celts also engaged in various forms of divination during Samhain. Because they believed the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, they thought it was an ideal time for their druids, priests, to predict the future. These predictions were vital, as they would help guide the Celts through the long, dark winter. Samhain was not just about fear or survival, however. It was also a time of community celebration. Feasts were held and people gathered together to enjoy the bounty of the harvest. In many ways, it was a festival of both life and death, honoring the past while looking toward the future. As the Roman Empire expanded and the influence of Catholicism grew across Europe, many pagan traditions, including Samhain, began to blend with Catholic practices. When the Roman Empire conquered Celtic lands, they brought their own festivals with them, including Feralia, a day in late October when Romans commemorated the passing of the dead, and a second festival honoring Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. Some historians believe that the combination of these Roman traditions with Samhain influenced the eventual creation of Halloween. In 609 AD, Pope Boniface IV established the Feast of All Martyrs, a day dedicated to honoring Christian martyrs who had died for their faith. This feast was later expanded by Pope Gregory III to include all saints, not just martyrs, and it was moved from May 13th to November 1st. This shift aligned the celebration of All Saints' Day with the Celtic festival of Samhain, creating a blend of Catholic and pagan elements. By the 9th century, Catholic influence had spread deep into Celtic lands. As it did, the Church sought to replace or absorb the existing pagan customs with its own religious celebrations. In 1000 AD, the Church added November 2nd as All Souls' Day, a day to honor the dead and pray for the souls in purgatory. All Souls' Day was celebrated in a manner similar to Samhain, with bonfires, parades, and dressing up in costumes, though now people dressed as saints, angels, and devils rather than as spirits of the dead. The blending of these traditions eventually led to the creation of All Hallows' Eve, the night before All Saints' Day, which in time became known as Halloween. The word Halloween itself is derived from the term All Hallows' Eve, the evening before All Saints' Day. The Catholic Church's intent was to offer a Christian alternative to the pagan festival of Samhain, but many of the original customs remained, especially those involving spirits and the supernatural. Halloween, as we know it today, began to take shape in the United States during the 19th century. Massive waves of immigrants, particularly the Irish fleeing the Irish potato famine, brought their Halloween customs to America. Irish and Scottish communities continued their old traditions, such as dressing up in costumes, playing pranks, and carving turnips into lanterns, an early precursor to today's pumpkin jack-o'-lanterns. In the early days of Halloween in America, pranks and mischief were a central feature of the celebration. Young people would play tricks on their neighbors, sometimes going so far as to damage property or cause chaos in the streets. However, by the late 19th century, there was a movement to tone down the more unruly aspects of Halloween and focus on making it a family-friendly event. Communities began organizing parties, parades, and festivals, and the emphasis shifted from pranks to costumes and treats. And By the 20th century, Halloween had become a mainstream holiday in the United States. It continued to evolve, with trick-or-treating becoming a widespread practice in the 1920s and 1930s. Children would dress up in costumes and go door to door, asking for candy or other treats in exchange for refraining from playing tricks on the homeowners. This tradition was heavily influenced by the earlier European practice of souling, in which people would go from house to house on All Souls' Day, offering prayers for the dead in exchange for food. As Halloween became more popular, it also became more commercialized. By the mid-20th century, stores began selling pre-made costumes, decorations, and specially packaged Halloween candies. Today, Halloween is one of the most commercially successful holidays in the United States, second only to Christmas in terms of retail spending. Now the question is, should Christians celebrate Halloween? The question of whether Christians should celebrate Halloween is one that has sparked debate for many years. On the one hand, Halloween's origins are undeniably pagan, and some of its modern practices, such as the glorification of fear, death, and the occult, are clearly incompatible with Christian beliefs. On the other hand, many of the darker elements of Halloween have been stripped away or replaced with harmless fun, such as dressing up in costumes, attending parties, and trick-or-treating. For many Christians, the fact that Halloween has pagan origins is reason enough to avoid it altogether. Samhain, the festival that eventually gave rise to Halloween, was steeped in beliefs about spirits, death, and the supernatural. Even though many of these elements have been toned down or reinterpreted over the centuries, Halloween still carries some of the same themes of fear and darkness. The Bible makes it clear that Christians should have no part in activities that involve the occult, witchcraft, or the worship of false gods. In Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 to 12, "There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer, for all that do. These things are an abomination unto the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord thy God doth drive them out from before thee." For those who believe that Halloween still retains some of its pagan and occult roots, participating in the holiday can feel like compromising their faith. As Christians, we must ask ourselves, is it wise to engage in a holiday that aligns so closely with witchcraft and pagan practices? The Bible consistently warns us to avoid involvement with the occult, divination, and practices that invite spiritual darkness. Halloween, which coincides with Samhain, the most sacred holiday for witches, is a time when many engage in rituals to honor the dead and seek communication with the spiritual realm. This is not a coincidence, but a continuation of pagan traditions that have carried over through history. While society may dress Halloween up as harmless fun, with costumes, candy, and festivities, it is essential to look beneath the surface. What might seem innocent on the outside is still rooted in spiritual practices that the Bible clearly warns us against. Even though the modern version of Halloween has been commercialized and stripped of some of its darker elements, the fact remains that witches and those practicing pagan religions continue to see this time as one of deep spiritual significance. The Bible calls us to be holy, set apart for God. In 1 Peter 1:16, it says, "Be holy, because I am holy." Another critical point to consider is the dramatic rise in the number of practicing witches in recent years. According to recent analyses, the number of practicing witches in the US has grown significantly. In 1990, there were an estimated 8,000 practicing witches, but by 2018, that number had surged to around 1.5 million, surpassing some mainline Protestant denominations, including the Presbyterian Church. This dramatic growth indicates a shift in spiritual practices, particularly in Western countries. Events like the Pendleside Hospice Witch Festival in Barrowford Park in Lancashire in 2022, which had 1,882 attendees, further illustrate this trend, breaking the previous record of 1,607 attendees set in Spain in 2013. Imagine that we are witnessing events where over 1,000 witches gather together, and it has happened on more than one occasion. While witches celebrate other holidays like Yule, winter solstice, and Beltane, Halloween remains the most important. This fact should give Christians pause, as the growing popularity of witchcraft and Halloween's association with the occult reflect a spiritual environment that is increasingly hostile to biblical values. In contrast to its pagan roots, Halloween has become highly commercialized in modern times. For many people, the holiday is less about honoring the dead or engaging with the supernatural, and more about having fun with costumes, candy, and decorations. The emphasis has shifted from its darker, religious aspects to lighthearted activities that are largely seen as harmless. For Christians who are concerned about the pagan origins of Halloween, this commercialization can be viewed as a positive development. The holiday has become so secularized that it bears little resemblance to the ancient festival of Samhain, and for many people, it has lost any spiritual or religious significance altogether. However, the fact that Halloween has been commercialized does not necessarily mean that it is appropriate for Christians to participate. While dressing up in costumes or going trick-or-treating may seem harmless, it's important to remember that not all aspects of Halloween are benign. Haunted houses, horror movies, and occult-themed costumes still play a significant role in the holiday, and these elements can send a confusing message to both believers and non-believers. Participating in these darker aspects of Halloween can blur the lines between good and evil, leading to spiritual confusion. One of the key principles of the Christian faith is the concept of freedom in Christ. While we are called to live in accordance with God's word, we are also given the freedom to make choices in areas where the Bible does not give specific instructions. Romans 14 verse 5-6 says, "One person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord." This passage reminds us that, as Christians, we have the freedom to make decisions about how we observe certain days and holidays. Halloween is not mentioned in the Bible, so the decision of whether to celebrate it is ultimately a matter of personal conviction. For some Christians, Halloween may be seen as an opportunity to engage with the community and participate in innocent fun without compromising their faith. For others like myself, the holiday's association with the occult and the supernatural makes it too problematic to celebrate or be involved in. My family, my local church, my children, and I choose not to celebrate Halloween due to its dark elements and its origins in pagan beliefs. I encourage other Christians to consider doing the same. As believers, we should avoid associating with anything rooted in pagan practices. As 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, "Whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God." Ask yourself, can you truly celebrate Halloween in a way that glorifies God? Personally, I cannot. What about you? Comment below with your thoughts.